So welcome everybody, and maybe good afternoon and good morning if someone is joining us from other areas of the world, other time zones. My name is Federica Sasso, and I'm the coordinator of resource development for the Racing Center for Education and Dialogue. And we are the Racing Center really delighted to have you with us. I will just spend 1 minute speaking about the format of our event, which is a Zoom webinar, meaning that the audience, the member of the audience will not be able to see each other, but we'll just see the panelists and listen to this audio, but they will be able to share questions in the chat box. So if as the evening progresses, questions arise and you want to share them, please do, and we will do our best to incorporate them in our conversation. Also, please feel free to use the chat box to maybe introduce yourselves, to let us know who you are and where you are joining from. Now I really want to introduce the Racing Center for those who are new to our webinars and maybe don't know our work very much. The Racing Center for Education and Dialogue is an interreligious organization based here in Jerusalem, which is working to give Israelis and Palestinians, Jews, Christians, and Muslims the desire and the capacity to build inclusive societies here in the Holy Land. Societies which are based on shared values of understanding, respect, justice, and equality for all. And we carry on our work through many different projects, both within Israeli society and through cross-border work, either in East Jerusalem or with Palestinians in the West Bank. Our work is organized along two main thematic areas. One is dedicated to shared societies within the education system, and the other one is focused on transforming mixed spaces into true shared society environments. Among our activities since the beginning of the pandemic, we also started offering webinars such as this one. And with our webinars, we have been addressing issues of interreligious dialogue, interreligious peace building, and all sorts of topics that are relating to these themes. Tonight, we chose to dedicate our webinar to peace building after May 2021. And we are very, very honored to have with us four experts from the field of peace building in Israel and Palestine. And we will have a chance to listen from them how the bout of violence that we experienced in May 2021 affected, transformed peace building efforts in our region. Unfortunately, we experienced another moment of violence this year during the time of Easter, Pesach, and Ramadan. And we thought that here at the Racing Center, we thought that it was important to pause and reflect and hear from practitioners in the field how these moments of violence, how these tensions that were really transformative in some way have impacted the efforts for peace building and maybe even changed some of the dynamics in the field. So now I'm going to introduce our panelists. I will introduce them each one in turn, and each one of them will have a chance after my introduction to add more and say more about themselves and about their work they are carrying on. So I will start with Dr. Ram Kutner, who is the head of the International Graduate Program in Peace and Conflict Management Studies at the University of Haifa. He's an expert in the field of conflict resolution and mediation and teaches about this in many different contexts. Until recently, Dr. Kuttner also served as an academic advisor to Givat Haviva, an organization that aims at building a shared society and dialogue among Jews and Arabs in Israel. Dr. Kuttner, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Federica. Thank you for this kind introduction, after which I don't have much to say about myself, maybe a few more words about the program on peace and conflict management, which is an international program. Students come from all over the world. We just had this week the graduation ceremony. They come from all over the world to study peace building with the vocation and the wish and the hope to become conflict specialists and peace builders going back to the countries, Africa, Europe, America, China, Far East. This year, We had students from Ukraine and Russia with all the complexities involved. Obviously, this was a major issue that was discussed. And we also have the hope and the aim of having the next generation of professionals that can work in the field, helping NGOs and organizations with the very important work that is being done on the ground, the grassroots level, and also in terms of the infrastructure. Let me start maybe by talking about infrastructure rather than grassroots level. And I think looking at May 2021 and the events that took place in May 21, that it sheds light on some of the challenges that we are facing. Some of my colleagues got really depressed after these events, saying we're doing all this shared society work and it's all for nothing. Here in few weeks, dramatic weeks, we saw the escalation and we saw how the glue and cement that we're working on throughout the years is not really helping. So what's the use? Maybe, no future. I tend to say that, yes, first and foremost, it was harsh, it was difficult, it was challenging, it created it puts a mirror to our face in a way that alerts us and we should be aware of. At the same time, I think it also puts a mirror to our face to understand we cannot do superficial work. You said so beautiful before that we want to transform shared spaces to true shared society environments. What does it mean, true shared society environments? In many of the times, the work that we do, not we, people here in the room are doing wonderful work, but in terms of society and in terms of some of the social norms, that some of the concepts, the old concepts of coexistence and of just let the quiet and ease be something that allows us to do nothing, is something that we cannot live with anymore. There's so much repression of some of these bubbling issues underneath that need to be taken into account. I tend to say that as a mediator, as a peace builder, my work is counterintuitive. It seems as if I'm here to just create this peace and quiet. Sometimes I say, no, my work is to be the stimulator of conflicts and help shed light and help them bring them into the forefront so we can allow the sunshine and the light and the work to be done in order to do that. I'm a philosophy graduate originally. And, one of my teachers, I didn't study with him, I didn't have a chance, but Socrates is like one of the fathers of our field. He was a troublemaker. He was about creating some vibes and noise and help people question what seems to be working well. And in a way, part of our role as peace builders is to surface these conflicts and make sure that we face them wholeheartedly and courageously and constructively. And some of the old concepts of coexistence and some of the old concepts of how we go about together, living side by side, they don't fit anymore. Definitely not in the 21st century. Definitely not with the community of Arab Israelis, Palestinian Israelis that do not suffice with that anymore. They do not fit also well with those among the Jewish population that feel strong enough and confident enough to open to new possibilities of what does it mean to be an Israeli? What does it mean to develop an identity of Israel as a state which is more inclusive, more multidimensional, more versatile, and that allows space and room for the co-construction of the understanding of the meaning of what it is to be an Israeli in a way that gives space to communities and populations that we did not allow that before. Obviously, there's a history. Obviously, there's a background. There's issues to be understood in terms of the fears and collective anxieties also among Jewish population. At the same time, we cannot suffice with that. And it's about being brave enough to say, okay, we need to understand the co-constructive nature of dialogue. Dialogue as a form of going together as opposed to negotiation or conversation or discussion is a form of going on together in a way that we co-construct our reality without imposing who we are on our reality, but rather discovering it together. This is something very frightening. For the Jewish population in Israel, I'm speaking now as a Jew, as someone who understands, the collective anxiety of our people. This is something that requires from us to be permissive of processes that bring even more anxiety in terms of what it is expected from us. There's a lot of work that we need to do. At the same time, also with the Arab populations, part of the work that we're doing, that I'm doing in various projects, Givat Chaviva or others, is about empowering and helping other, Arab partners to be partners in the most profound sense of partnership, which is joint responsibility, shared responsibility, working together, looking at each other in the eye in order to develop and build the concept of who we are as a nation. Obviously, some of my Arab colleagues and friends will say, yes, we want, but the Jewish majority does not allow it. True in many ways, and obviously we've been going through some difficulties with the nationality law, and I wouldn't want to go into that. And at the same time, not but, and we teach how to do yes and, not to do yes but. And together with the challenges that are being imposed from the outside, from the Jewish majority, not necessarily allowing the Arabs to be partners, sometimes it's also about the maturation and the ability and the strength of the Arab population to be able to kind of stand up and work as partners also when the hand is being extended. So it is complex. There are no easy answers. I don't want to give up on the notion of Israel being a Jewish and democratic state. Too easy to say it doesn't work together. You need to choose either you're Jewish or democratic. I think life is complex. There's tensions that need to be contained and need to be managed in a way that are progressive, in a way that are constructive, in a way that are able to contain both the Jewish aspect of the Israeli society and the democratic aspect in a way that eventually on the ground allows developing that sense of partnership and allowing to develop a sense of togetherness and a shared identity of Israeliness, where it's no longer about us as Jews or Arabs as Arabs, but rather something that is evolving together without the fear and with the hope of being able to maintain eventually a more complex sense of identity. I can speak for myself that my sense of identity becomes more grounded and more contextualized when I'm open to understand the heritage of the other cultures within the Israeli history, with the history of this state, and allowing that to be part of my own identity. In that respect, I know that there is no other way, and I cannot escape understanding that my identity is shaped and constructed together and through elements that are part of what other cultures and Arab and Palestinian populations bring with them into the mix. As I avoid it, as I shield myself from it, I shield myself from true and full presence of myself. I don't know if I still have time, Federica. You should tell me how well I'm doing and if I should stop. My 5 minutes are over.
I think you put so many important issues on the table.
So it's enough. Okay.
Maybe we can come back. No.
Sure.
We can come back to that after during the conversation. But
Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is amazing. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I will now introduce Professor Mohammad Dajani, the co-founder and director of Wasatia. He has been active in forming relationships with Jewish and Christian religious leaders and peace activists. Prior to engaging in nonviolence, Professor Dajani had been a member of Fatah, but after various interactions with Israelis, he decided to pursue alternative approaches. He also holds several doctorate degrees and was a Western Fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Please, Professor Dajani, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Federica. It's a pleasure to be here. And I would like to start by introducing Wasatia. Wasatia is a concept, it's a term that calls for moderation. And initially, it started by trying to promote a moderate culture within the Palestinian society. And then it developed into different levels, from focusing on Islam, moderation in Islam, to moderation in religion, then to a second level of moderation and philosophy and moderation in life eventually. So it talks now about people, whether coming from different religions, to believe in moderation and tolerance and acceptance. And then I started as the founder of the Wasatia movement in Palestine, which promotes the concept of moderation within society. Then part of that, we have the Wasatia education, which focuses on the curriculum, on improving the curriculum, because we feel that the curriculum is important, and developing a moderate curriculum that teaches about peace, about tolerance, about acceptance, about empathy, about mercy is very important for children as a start. But then it is not enough to work on the curriculum, because even if the curriculum is a moderation curriculum or Wasatia curriculum or a peace curriculum, yet if the teachers are not involved in the curriculum, in peace education and moderation education, then the textbooks are not enough in order to reach out to students, because the teacher could twist that. And that's why we also focus on the idea of developing reconciliation centers that teaches or promotes reconciliation on the doctorate level, and the sense of trying to educate an elite, not only Palestinians and Israelis, but also among the region, because it's very important to involve different countries which are in conflict. And here, the reconciliation idea is not necessarily post-conflict, but in midst of conflict, in the sense that in the Arab-Israeli conflict, we need to promote reconciliation in midst of conflict, rather than wait till the conflict is over. And it doesn't look like it is going to be over if we do not try to bring in the concept of trust, the concept of cooperation, the concept of normalization, the concept of peace, and try to make these concepts acceptable to the people, particularly now that the extremists are against such concepts and put doubts in the minds of people regarding peace and reconciliation and normalization, and consider such important concepts and values to be treacherous, and put on them a negative image. And that's why we try to bring in the courage in people so that they can stand up and fight the extremism that is plaguing our societies.
Thank you so much, Professor Dajani, for this. Again, like, very important. Your presentations are already speaking to each other, and we will go back to a lot of what has been already said. I will move on now to introduce Hela Lahar, the CEO of Tech to Peace. She has spent the last 17 years devoted to strategic development and leadership of new initiatives in different organizations in both Israel and the US, and has led many multinational programs. Most recently, Hela has served as the acting executive director of the PeaceWorks Foundation and has worked closely with Darkenu in Tel Aviv and Zimam in Ramallah. Please, Hela.
I don't know if anyone here does this sometimes, but I used to have this as a kid. I used to have this game where when I would go into the shower, I would stand in front of the mirror and give my Oscar acceptance speech. And if you like award shows, as I do, you know that most people that start their acceptance speech, they start with, "It's such an honor being nominated and being amongst these nominees." And it always feels so silly and fake when people say it. But I have to say, I genuinely am so honored A, to be included on this panel, and B, especially connecting to a lot of what's already been said. And I'm very lucky to know Sulaiman from previous interactions and shared friends. So I can already imagine what he's going to say, and I feel very lucky to be included. So thank you. I want to connect to several things that were said that I think are very, in my mind, very critical, and also speak a lot to our mission vision at Tech to Peace. Tech to Peace is a nonprofit that really connects the intersection between tech and entrepreneurship training alongside dialogue facilitation. And the intention in tying these two things together is to do two things. First is to really create a model and a lead by example of what cooperation and fruitful collaboration could look like when we work together, when we put our heads together towards initiatives and tech and fruitful collaboration that could really benefit everyone. And the second is, and I think that speaks a little bit, at least in my mind, towards moderation and listening to the other and coming together and shared society. The other component of it is the dialogue component, where we're trying to bring together through tech and entrepreneurship, kind of the, not preaching to the choir, but a diverse group of Israelis and Palestinians, Jews, Muslims, and Christians who come together to really create and establish some level of trust where they're able, through professional facilitated dialogue, to really listen to each other. I think that's something that we're really lacking. There's some interaction, I would argue, too few interaction between Israelis and Palestinians, Jews and Palestinians. But even in that interaction, a lot of the time we keep to the surface. And there's not a lot of really diving deep into, and I want to connect to what Professor Kuttner said before about stirring trouble, because as long as we stay on the surface level of, oh, you know, we love the beach and we all love hummus, or, you know, when things stir up, as they did last May, and as you mentioned in Easter, Passover, and Ramadan, that breaks apart. And we saw some of it break apart. But I think that once you establish a level of trust where, I won't tell you that at Tech to Peace, people come in and they leave wrapped up in each other's flags. That's not the point. But when we can establish a level of trust where people are able to actively listen to each other and understand where the other is coming from. Listening does not necessarily mean agreeing, does not necessarily mean accepting each other's background, story, narrative, but we all walk around with big, heavy ethos, national narratives that are kind of in the way of fruitful, peaceful living. And when we come together and kind of unpack it together, we're very lucky to see a lot of what I would call aha moments, where through dialogue, through establishing this human connection, people can really start developing empathy towards one another. To the point where I can give a million examples, but things like really being able to hear and accept, again, accepting and agreeing are two different things, but accepting that there's another side-by-side narrative to the way that they've experienced reality. And I think that that creates the basis for real connection. Something that we saw last May, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it, it was very harsh. I think that all of us that do this as a profession day in, day out, we deal with this on a personal level, but also on a professional level. So we're inundated with everything that's happening around, not just when it spikes in the news, and then especially so when it spikes in the news, and then it inundates our world very, I would say, aggressively. But the wonderful thing that we at Tech to Peace had experienced last May is a coming together. Again, not everyone, not all the time, not kumbaya, but because people had already established a community where they could speak to each other, there was a moment of real crisis. And then from that, people said, wait, but we want to talk to each other. Now is the time to have, like, we learned how to talk to each other. We learned how to have these dialogues. Now is the time to use these tools that we were given to really exercise them. And it was heart-lifting. It was beautiful. And we saw it again this May when there was all this violence in every direction, where we had community members reach out to us and say, we want to talk to each other. Can you please facilitate a conversation for us where we can speak with they needed us to facilitate it, because obviously there was fear, there was anxiety, because they can reach out to each other all the time, but there was fear and anxiety, and they did want kind of a facilitated conversation. But the fact that their knee-jerk reaction was not to disengage, but rather to engage with each other, it's creating exactly this infrastructure that, you know, we have a very limited reach at the moment, but inshallah, you grow that scope and you start creating real impact in society where people can speak to each other and understand each other and hear each other's narratives in a way that has empathy. And I think that that's the starting point. And I just want to connect to a lot of what my predecessors said before me, but I think that establishing this trust and not staying on the superficial and really diving in, I can tell you that our methodology, you know, we start very, very slow and we lean into some conversations until we really dive into the difficult conversations. But we really touch on in my mind, when I think about it, I think about when you have an open sore and you like push on it. We don't start by pushing on it, but we get there, and we intentionally get there. This past, I actually don't remember if it was April or May, Independence Day Nakba, we intentionally in that time had a program that dealt with Independence Day and Nakba, because we don't want to shy away from these really, really hard, difficult conversations. We want to lean into them, because that is when you create that ability to really create that strength that will not falter when things happen. And unfortunately, we live in a region where things happen all the time. We were exposed to it in the news, both on the Palestinian side and on the Israeli side. There's violence occurring, unfortunately, fairly regularly. And so to really build these relationships and see each other's humanity and develop empathy for each other and how we're interconnected, in order to create this, I want to connect to what Mohammad said, to create this moderation, to create this ability to listen to each other, I think is key and really important. And I said it 3 times, I think, already, but I'll say it the 4th time and I'll end with that. I really do think that understanding that actively listening and understanding someone does not mean that you're offering validity. And I think that once we disconnect these two from each other, people are more comfortable sitting with difference, understanding someone else's narrative, understanding where people are coming from. Something that Professor Kuttner said before that resonated with me. It's not your words, I'm paraphrasing, but what I heard is, on the one hand, Jewish Israelis are a powerful majority. On the other hand, they're a persecuted minority, and having to sit with these differences. And I think that as such, to really understand, to kind of zoom out for a second and really understand the realities, the geopolitical realities, the realities on the ground, to really understand both sides of what I just said, and that balance of both, having that anxiety and feeling fear, and on the other hand, understanding how much power you have and that imbalance of power in this conflict. And the same, I can turn to the other side and say, with Palestinians, and understanding how much, it's hard to say because to me it feels so helpless in this disparity, but to really understand how much agency they have in this conversation, and should take, and not wait to be given, because I think that these conversations are the key to moving forward, and that's why we're in the business of creating them.
Thank you so much. As a member of the Rustling Center, it's also very beautiful to hear that you also experienced this reach out from both sides during moments of tension. We also experienced that with some of our programs, and it's beautiful to see that when there is really a relationship, it doesn't break apart so easily, and it's happening. So I will introduce our fourth speaker, Sulaiman Khatib, the co-founder and International Relations Director of Combatants for Peace. In both 2017 and 2018, he was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. At the age of 14, Khatib was sentenced to 15 years in prison and served a term of 10.5 years, where he spent his time learning and began to have new thoughts about the conflict and the means for resolving it. As a result, today he's committed to peace and has been active in the field for the last 20 years. He is also the author of In This Place Together, a Palestinian's journey to collective liberation, alongside co-author Pnina Elberg-Schwartz.
Oof, thank you. And thanks God we didn't get Nobel, so that put us in a more simple place. Thank you, and thanks, Federica, really, for having us here, and for friends here that really, everyone really spoke beautifully and meaningful, of course. And I feel we're like covering different parts of the same thing, actually, having similar experiences. I just maybe trying to add, since we're talking about the challenges that happened since 2021 and 2022, and some of the speakers spoke about the challenges that triggered what's called the coexistence within Israel proper. And I think it's really an opportunity for us to speak about the real issues that we face. One, like basically, there is a lot of attention to the violence when there is a violence against the Israelis. That's honestly what I see, even among the peace community. But there is a systematic violence daily. Like I live in the occupied territory, my family too. Now I'm speaking from Ramallah, but it's also occupied. And when I go to my family in Hizma, I also have challenges, like with the checkpoints, with the army everywhere, with the settlers' activities. So it's really important for me maybe to bring this reality a bit to the conversation. And I really like that we are speaking really honesty and really bring the roots of things. And And from time to time, when we had like escalation, like the war in Gaza and other situations, definitely in our communities, as Hela mentioned, like in Tech to Peace or in Wasatia or Combatants for Peace and other groups, in our relations, of course, erupted like in many times, and it's not easy. Generally, let's say it's not easy to sell hope, especially for despair people that really live under unjust system for decades. And when there is more escalation, so like our mission become harder, but it's more actually important in those times. That's what I would say from our experiences. I would say this, I personally, like this is my personal opinion, I maybe represent Combatants for Peace as one of the organizations that really active in the field, but in the wider activist community, I really don't expect a rosy road. Like this is to start. And I learned this in jail. If we talk about a revolution, a real change, a real systematic change, because I don't see the system that control our life from the river to the sea really stable or fairness at all. It serves certain percentage of the population, and this system is not gonna stay forever. And I definitely support to change the system, to transform the system. And now we are talking about maybe this need another conversation, but we're talking about grassroots activism and promoting non-violence to the as a solution for the conflict, but also as not just strategy, just really as a culture, as Professor Mohammad Dajani spoke, for example, from the Islamic resources and from local cultures, and we can also highlight different resources that would support that. I would say this, there is really a big challenge, usually. How do we, as different organizations, doing different things, tackling different issues, some of it may be involved in direct action against the system, especially in like in the occupied territory, like for example, what we see now in South Hebron Hills, in Jordan Valley, and across the West Bank and East Jerusalem and a few other places. Or if we involve in dialogue, as everybody's here, like engaging in dialogue and bringing our peoples together, which is still very important. And we spoke about the power of narratives and the stories, how we grew up in each side. I guess it's really important for me maybe to mention one is the power dynamic here is not equal. And it's important to say this, not to play the victim, rather than just to state the truth and the reality. Also, like maybe to bring up some of our experiences has also taught us that hiding any feelings or emotions on the table doesn't help. And that's why we, Dr. Dajani spoke in the last Nakba ceremony that in Combatants for Peace we organized among our other big events together with our Israeli partners. For me, this is a big thing. And it happened, I can tell you, after more than 15 years of starting Combatants for Peace. So that really shows us there is a long, long way. And of course, we do like the memorial ceremony, which is more Israeli type of thing, right? For Palestinians. So for Palestinians to join this is like a beyond any imagination in a ongoing active conflict. It's not a post-conflict. We are not talking about Ireland here. So I think with that said, how much is important and inspiring for many people to join is really still important to really be conscious on the power dynamic that exists in the system, which affect our organizations within, especially if I'm talking about a joint organizations that include Palestinian and Israeli. I also would say, I may be bringing our experiences like from Combatants for Peace as one of the active organizations in the field. It's obviously not enough for us to just oppose the system and everybody want to change the unjust system. Now it's a worldwide thing anyway, after Corona, and but it's definitely important to build the new reality we are talking about. And this is why I personally, deeply from my maybe 20 years experience, would say it's really important to support the organizations that are trying to build these communities across the line, whether using high tech or interculture or interreligion or all kind of techniques or music or anything. I think this is really important. And maybe the fine line here is really sensitive a bit, and that's why the criticism sometimes that has a place of legitimacy maybe. How do we support these communities, building these communities, these organizations, and not to fall into playing within the same separation system and the power dynamic and the status quo? How do we disturb the status quo? That's a really other question for me. Yeah, because like there is a dilemma here. We don't support violence. We don't want violence. Of course, we promote non-violence action, reality also. At the same time, we want to change the system. So I just like throw this question. I mean, usually in these conversations, it's good to really to leave people with some maybe uncomfortable feelings sometimes, and sometimes like questions that has no answers. I just want to say something that really inspired me a little bit today. I'm always optimistic, I have to say. The visit of the, oh, sorry, I just look at the time. The visit of the Bob Francis, I believe his name, to Canada, to the indigenous communities there, and the apology that he made. It's really a beginning, a little of beginning of a historical reconciliation between the colonizers and the indigenous people. And I wish to see this happen here by, you know, building more trust and really like looking at the traumas, the community traumas that happened here over generations. And that's why I think really the power of the stories and narratives, bringing up the Nakba for Palestinian, bringing the stories of the Holocaust and the Jewish story over the history also, it's always really important in order for us to move forward. And I really see more awareness around the world, and we are part of this, around the indigenous rights, because the modern system has really not like destroyed the local culture, but just rather it destroyed the environment, as we can see globally, and we are really connected, and it's destroying. So many people are trying to go back to build communities and to benefit from the ancient wisdom that exists. And the last thing to say here, maybe this is maybe a lot of my efforts usually as somebody believe in a bridge building between different communities, is really how can we use the local wisdom, the local culture, even like what we call the Arab, for example, just one example, when we talk about sulha, like reconciliation, I want to see more of localizing the terms we are using, so many of our people can really relate to what we say. I come from more a tribal like family that still practice this tradition, and it's thousands of years. And to recognize that we both, or more than both peoples, can really love the same land, the same stones. I don't see a challenge there or trigger. I believe this is more beauty, plenty of love for the same place, and this is my hope. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really, each one of you has highlighted different faces of this situation, and it's really beautiful also to see how there's many different ways to tackle this reality and to work on it. Some of you already addressed how the violence in 2021 and also this year kind of changed a little bit. Either the dynamic of the possibility of impacting the status quo, as Sulaiman was saying. But I would like to ask you maybe to elaborate a little further, asking if, have you seen really a change in how the reality responds to you, and how maybe you or your organizations had to adapt the work that you're carrying on in order to respond to this? I don't know if maybe Ran, you want to go ahead?
I can give it a try. So I wear two hats here. I'm both an academician. I'm doing the work on the academia and, you know, teaching at the university and helping the students of tomorrow, the practitioners of tomorrow, to more develop their capacity, and I'm being also a practitioner. I will combine both heads by saying that the work that we do in academia when teaching and helping students develop methodologies and developing the infrastructure and the capacity to see the bigger picture and to come in a more systematic way into approaching situations. For example, first class will be on the concept of ripeness. And the concept of ripeness is very much has to do with what Hela spoke about, which is not to push on the open sore, right? But rather how to lean in and how to be able to find and meet situations where they are and do the things accordingly. So ripeness is very important, understanding what is right and what's ripe in the situation and how to build infrastructure. So that's on the academic level. I bring it on the practical level because now as a practitioner where people bring the disparity and bring the sense of maybe reluctant aspiration towards some of these concepts and ideas that we bring, it's time for us to take a step back and say, okay, let's work on the infrastructure. Let's build resilience, okay? Let's build resilience and remember what resilience is. We like, this is a term that is being spoken about so much. Many people speak about resilience now. Resilience is there about the ability of a body, of a system to come back to functional capacities after a breakdown, okay, after a crisis. So here we are with a crisis. Are we resilient? To a certain degree, yes. To a certain degree, we are finding difficulties to continue with our work. We're doing now a research on what happened in Haifa, going into details, into understanding day by day what happened in May 2021 in Haifa. And part of the results and part of the recommendations that we'll come up with is to help the municipality and to help the police and to help some of the community leaders develop the resilience and develop the capacity so that when crisis occurs, to be able to seize the escalation and allow us to come back to more to the well-being of capacity to work well. So it's time for us to work on the infrastructure, and it's time for us to ask. And this is where, Hela, maybe I want to challenge you a bit, and you and others, in saying, you know, it's not just about understanding the stories of others. It's not about getting to a better understanding of the narratives, but rather, how do we go on together? How are we able to move in the space together in ways that make sense to all of us, where we synchronize our rhythms, our ideas, that we create a movement, a joint movement in space that is nourishing and is meaningful. And I challenge you, Hela, because I know the Tech to Peace does that, right? Because it's not just about speaking, it's about people coming together with looking at the future of developing professional career and capacities, professional technological capacities, and so on and so forth. So I would say it's not just in an empty space. When the Givat Chaviva educational programs work with students, those programs that are meaningful are programs where you don't bring students to speak about the narratives and to get to know the other cultures' narratives, but rather, how do we develop the well-being of our region? So you think on a regional level in Wadi Ara, okay, where you take a school from a Jewish municipality and a nearby Arab municipality, okay? What is our region and how do we go on together in order to, as we said, step into agency, not to wait to be given agency, but rather be proactive with taking this place. So I think I've said a lot already. I hope it makes sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank you for connecting these very deep elements of self-identity, but also the need to self-reflect, but to really step into action and not just self-reflect together. So these two deep, please.
I would say on the deep level, on the deepest level, it's also about self-identity, but it's about realization, understanding how identity is being formed and reformed within situations and contexts, not in solitude. So I don't give up on identity, but I understand the deepness and the profoundness of interconnectedness, okay? Things that we learned from the feminist movement and things that are around for the last few decades. It's about understanding identity, not in solitude, but rather as an ongoing process of formation jointly. It's interdependence, and this is profound.
I'd love to connect to two things you said. One thing, challenge accepted. I absolutely agree with you that the first level or the ground level should be being able to hear each other and understand each other's narratives. It is absolutely not the end result. I 100% agree with you that that is not enough. Something that I had in mind as I was saying it, I don't want to dive to a million different examples, but just one example that that kind of stuck with me and is what I was building that on. In one of the seminars that we had this past February, in one of the smaller dialogue groups on the second week of the seminar. So there's like people have been together for a full week and some level of trust has been built and people feel more comfortable kind of really saying what they're thinking and not shying away from kind of the harder things to say. I came in the middle of a conversation, so I didn't hear the beginning of the conversation, but I heard one of the Palestinian participants say, I understand that the Holocaust is a profound thing, that it's a profound historical event that happened in the Jewish collective memory, but it's a historical event. It happened over 70 years ago. And Nakba is something that we live day in and day out that has not ended yet. And you could see it was two Palestinian participants, two Jewish Israeli participants, and the Israeli participants kind of physically went back because until that point, what they had known about Nakba is that that is what Palestinians call, what they call Independence Day. To them, they didn't understand that for Palestinians, it's an ongoing situation that has not ended because there is no Palestinian self-determination in 2022. And at the same time, okay, it took a second and there was like 20 seconds of silence. And then one of the Jewish participants, one of the Jewish Israeli participants said, I need to sit with this. I need to process this, but I do have to correct one thing. For us, the Holocaust is not a historic event. It's something that we live day in, day out with the understanding that if there is no state of Israel, there's nothing preventing it from happening again. And that same physical aha moment that happened on one side happened on the other side 2 seconds later. And that's what I mean with it doesn't necessarily mean accepting each other's narrative. Like I said before, no one leaves wrapped up in each other's flags, but even that understanding of what I just said, understanding that for Palestinians, Nakba is an ongoing event that has not ended because there is no Palestinian self-determination, and that the Holocaust is not merely a historic event that happened, it is in the past, but that in the Jewish collective memory is something that they understand as an ongoing threat. It changes the perception. Now, of course, that is not enough to move forward. You need to find the way to move forward together. But that's what I was referring to. That's what I had in my head when I said merely being able to listen to each other in a way that is not, you know, how often we listen to each other, but we don't really listen. We argue in our head with everything that the other person is saying to us. So really being proactively in conversation with what someone else is saying and understanding it and understanding where they're coming from, which is very different than what you knew 2 seconds ago. I also want to address the shift in May that happened. I don't think that it changed a lot of the way that we work or what we do as far as content goes. I think that the major shift that we saw was in recruitment. There's a lot of fear on both sides of coming into contact with each other and what that means, both on kind of political level, right? What does it mean? Is it normalization? Am I accepting someone's narrative by sitting in a room with them and listening to them? And there is a dialogue component. So not providing validity, but also in addition to that, there was another layer of I think, and it goes to what you were saying before about resilience, about despair, just despair. If this is what's happening, then what's the point? And I think that we saw that recruitment became more challenging around that time. Thankfully, by summer, kind of in this region, we're all very agile and we kind of roll with the punches because there's no other way. And that is that resiliency that I can tell you as someone who's been in peace building for almost a decade now, I myself go through these roller coaster I never thought about it as resiliency, but through these roller coaster periods where I'm somewhere between despair and going back to what Sulaiman said a minute ago about it's in these moments of crisis where I, Hela, feel I'm absolutely exactly where I need to be because this is really important work and we have to do this. So, you know, it's I'm somewhere between these polar opposites on a regular basis. And especially so, it's absolutely exacerbated in these moments of crisis. And I think that I never thought about it that way. And you're giving me a lot of food for thought, but creating this resiliency of not shying away, not being in despair, but really finding the way to understand the importance of what we do, not of course us peace builders, but I'm saying on a societal level, on a community level, for people to really establish this resiliency so that we don't see these challenges in recruitment when things happen, but actually people say, okay, this is the time to act. This is when I need to be proactive and meet my fellow Israeli, Palestinian, Jew, Muslim, Christian. I think that we absolutely need to work on that on a regional level. And again, connecting to something that Sulaiman said before about in any way we can, tech, art, academy, school, really throwing everything we have at it, because I really think that this is for all of our prosperity. You know, we all eventually just want to be able to live in peace and prosperity. And for that, we need to create that resiliency in any form that connects to, you know, if we create many different platforms, something will resonate with someone eventually.
Thank you so much, Hela. Thank you. I would like to ask Mohammad now, who has lots of experience around these conversations, if he also experienced some change around that time, and what from your point of view and the programs that you lead, have you seen any closure or any distancing among the participants? If you can give us your perspective.
Let me first start by trying to clarify one issue, because a lot of time we talk about Palestinians of 1948 and Palestinians of 1967 as if they are the same. You know, we address them the same, while we should not. Because also here, and for instance, when Israel is being described as an apartheid state, now it is meant to demonize Israel. Now, the question is, this apartheid state, where is it? Is it in Israel proper, or is it in the West Bank, or in Gaza, or in Jerusalem? And so here we do not, and there should be a distinction between the Palestinians who we call the Arab Israeli Palestinians, or are called the Palestinians of 1948, or Palestinians. The question is we are referring to Palestinians who hold Israeli citizenship, Israeli passports. And so here we need to make a distinction between a Palestinian who is an Israeli citizen, who might have, there might be some laws that could prejudice his rights, yet he has the power to vote and he has the power to change. And yet he does not vote, he does not participate. That's his problem. Now, this Palestinian is totally different than the Palestinian in the West Bank who does not have an Israeli passport or an Israeli citizenship and is living under the Palestinian Authority. So here, where the Palestinian with an Israeli passport, Israeli citizenship, needs to reform laws in order that they are not apartheid or that they are not racist or they do not prejudice him. And he has a responsibility by taking part in elections, by taking part in all the democratic process. This is not the same with the Palestinian in the West Bank, who actually is suffering from the occupation. And here, when you say this is apartheid, no, it's not apartheid, because on the contrary, using the term apartheid actually confuses the issue. And that's where we need to clarify this types of who is a Palestinian, what are they suffering from, what are the conditions that will improve their lifestyle, their life. And so that's why, and there is a lot of ignorance here, because a lot of people say, take the word normalization, they don't know what it means. But yet, they have made it in part of the Palestinian rhetoric in order to mean traitor or to mean collaborator, as if he is talking about collaborations with the Nazis under when the Nazis were occupying France. And so, which is totally wrong and totally improper comparison. Yet that's what they mean, because to them, a normalizer should be shot or should be killed or should be ostracized because he's a traitor, when actually he's not a traitor, he's a peacemaker. And on the contrary, he is doing much better, he is serving his cause much more than they do. And they miss that, and they try to use it as a label and try to make the masses think of it as a label so that they can control the game, the political game, because there is so much money involved, they cannot let go, and there is so much power involved in it. And that's where part of the problem that we need is ignorance, and we need to make the people aware. That's why when a young woman started a movement, an NGO, and she was working with Israeli peacemakers, they started to tell her, you are a normalizer, and that means you are a traitor, which was what I was described for taking students to Auschwitz. The communiques they issued, Dajani is a normalizer, and as such, he is a traitor. And so here, we try to explain that, okay, tell them that normalization to empower occupation is treason. Normalization to end occupation is patriotic, is nationalistic, more than you are, because we are doing something about it, and you are not. You are making it worse and getting us deeper and deeper in the hole, while we are trying to get you out of that hole that you dug yourself in. And so here, dialogue is important but it is what type of dialogue, how, on what level, and you have to have knowledge in order to have a good dialogue. Because when he starts with the sentence, you are a traitor, you are a normalizer, and you are a traitor, if you don't have the knowledge how to answer them, then you are lost, and your argument is lost. And that's why it's important, because extremism is an ideology. And that's why to fight an ideology, you need an ideology. It's an ideology of moderation. The same thing with conflict. In order to fight the ideology, the conflict education, you have to have peace education. And the problem is that you need to move on with your ideology with courage, because you need to stand up against these people who have power to control the street. You don't have that power. And extremism appeals to people. We want to give you back Palestine. You are going to tomorrow to return to Haifa and Jaffa, and Israel is over, and Israel will collapse, and we will win, and all that nonsense. And so people believe that, and they are fed with the lies, even in the way they are being educated. And that's where we need to get these people out of that cave of ignorance, in order for them to see the light, and the light of knowledge. And that's very important. It's very important. And as such, the dialogue you are talking about needs to be upgraded, in the sense of, you don't want an ignorant talking to a knowledgeable, a learned person, because they will never reach anyone. You need to teach the ignorant first and make him, and that's where we are starting. And that's where we believe that moderation ushers in reconciliation, and reconciliation ushers in trust and negotiation and goodwill, which brings in end of conflict and conflict resolution that will usher in democracy and peace and prosperity and security. And this is a cycle that starts with moderation, because unless we have moderation within, that goes down, seeps down, not a government to government, we have a government to government, which are both extremists. And so, and the masses down there are extremists. So we need to empower the culture of moderation in order for the masses to start to support the concept of peace. We need to rehabilitize the concept of peace and the concept of normalization, and stand up by them and defend them, and to say, yes, we are for peace, we are normalizers, because we believe that normalization will end occupation. And we are working with that with our friends on the other side, on the Israeli side. And so if you are working for peace without linking it to ending of occupation, then there is no peace. It's not peace you are talking about. You are not talking about peace. You have to link occupation, end of occupation, to the peace effort you are doing. Otherwise, it's hopeless. So that's.
Thank you so much for your very brave and very clear words. Really. I will just ask Sulaiman if he wants to tell us a little bit of his experience with Combatants for Peace after these last rounds of violence, if you and your organization have experienced something different. And then we will open up to questions from the audience.
Like similar to our friends here, I guess we all lived in these moments. And as I said before, people react differently, of course. I would say this is my experience in a few like escalation wars, especially wars in Gaza. And yes, it was triggering for many people. And for me too, for everyone, I guess, we react differently. Some, I would say a few, to be really honest, really the one that really carry the vision of beyond the now and the walls and the separation and the speeches of wars, they really firmly, strongly stayed close to our partners, alliances, let's say, on both sides, and believe in the values of coming together as a community to support each other in those kind of days. The emotional part is really important. And my experience also, like, which is maybe, I don't know how to say that, but some people has turned to join us actually during the escalation time. And in reminding of our own personal experiences, like the founders of Combatants for Peace were either ex-Palestinian prisoners, fighters, or ex-Israeli officers. And in many organizations, we see that. And these people, after experiencing violence in different ways, has reached the ultimate statement that there is no military solution for our conflict. And for some other people, it takes more time. So some people in these crises, actually, they do join us, actually. And because they feel there is something else, there is hope, there is a different path. And that's what we say always, there is another way, aside of like the one way, either us or them. I think the idea of us and them is a really not a simple thing. It exists deeply in the societies around us. And like working with the enemy, as Dr. Dajani mentioned, like it put you in a lot of risk, especially in these times. And I also think the peace community or the activist community has to be stronger and united, honestly, to defend itself in front of the criticism, which is sometimes by words and sometimes can be physically harsh or socially, you know. So, and to be proud of what we're doing. And that's why I 100% agree with Dr. Dajani. The peace work has to link to end the occupation and whatever, like any terms anybody want to use. We live under military occupation, and this is not going to be stable, and we're not going to accept this anyway. And we resist non-violently together as a co-resistance with our Israeli partners, and anyone that's refusing this system is welcome to join us. And this is out of this, we will be criticized on both sides. I personally feel proud. I just posted this panel on my personal Facebook. I live in Ramallah, nobody killed me. But of course, some people are angry everywhere. And maybe they have good reasons to be angry. I think the issue of normalization is, as we know from other conflicts, it's always not simple thing. There is no simple answer, like working with the enemy or turning the enemy into a friend. This is a big thing. For me, what strengthened us is really when we had a real Israeli partners that really don't serve the system anymore. This is honestly a precondition to really partnership. And that's why we could put our life in the front line, in the risk, anywhere, because we really feel inspired, we feel supported, we feel togetherness, and we feel also like all the dialogue we do is not just for the sake of dialogue, which is really important value, of course. And the last thing I want to mention, because we spoke a lot about the narratives here and listening, in the last few years, we started non-violence communication teaching in Combatants for Peace for some groups, for our groups. And actually, this was important during like the crisis. I would call it like crisis. We were living under the occupation daily and night, but like when there is more escalation, we could use these tools actually for listening and not judgment and for the needs of both sides. Because honestly, even Marshall Rosenberg that wrote this book, he speak about everyone, all the history, have the same needs, but not always the same, because the needs of Israelis are different from our needs. Our needs is still on the survival level. I need Israeli permit to go to where I born, to Jerusalem. So it's not the same. Israeli person that born in New York or Russia can move tomorrow to Jerusalem and have full right. So we are not in the same place. And let's be really honest. To liberate our people from this, the land and the people, I believe strongly our destiny is really connected, whether we want or not. I prefer to want this because I prefer to live in a colorful society where there is no tension and wars and control, rather than sharing the resources. And this is not where we are right now. To be really grounded in reality, the water resources, the land, the access to everything is controlled by the occupation system. That's the truth. I just came yesterday as a privileged person. I was traveling in Portugal. I came through Jordan. It's a hell of a trip to come back of control. I don't like. I think also there is a question sometimes to ask, like the powerful part, like how this powerful part will give up privilege, because it's not enough just to recognize even the power dynamic and the history. I don't have a quick answers. I'm just like touching some points that really important for my heart to say, not to blame one side and to take responsibilities together. I'm all for this, and to really heal together, I would say, with looking inside ourselves. I take responsibility. I don't see a problem there. I see more freedom there, and much better life for Palestinian is good for Israeli. That's how I see it, actually. Like, as we speak about make your neighbor's life much better, actually, and to share these resources that exist in this region.
Thank you. Actually, what you just said segues very well into the topic of a question that we received from Kevin. And both you, Sulaiman, and Mohammad already kind of answered, maybe for the Palestinian side. He asks, how do we work to bring anti-normalization Palestinians to Israeli Palestinians joint conversations and workshops? But maybe we can also ask the same thing about the Israeli side. How do we work with the Israeli side and Israelis who don't want to be involved in this, either conversation awareness in this type of work? So I don't know if maybe Hela or Ram want to start answering for, you know.
Hela, you should go first.
We're being too polite. Sorry, can you repeat the question?
My question was triggered by a question about anti-normalization and how do we bring, how do we deal with anti-normalization among Palestinians? But actually, we can also flip the question, since Mohammad and Sulaiman kind of answered already this. I don't know if they want to elaborate further on that, but I think that there's an issue also on the other side about maybe awareness and then willingness to be engaging.
I think that I actually find a lot of mirroring in this conflict, not necessarily between Israelis and Palestinians, but within the conflict, there's a lot of mirroring. And specifically on this point, I actually don't think that there's a lot of mirroring, because it represents itself very, very differently. I think that my experience with Palestinian society is different than that with Israeli society, where within Israeli society, I wouldn't call it anti-normalization. I would go back to what I said before, recognition, validation. I think that in engaging with Palestinians, and I want to connect to what Professor Dajani said before about the differentiation between 48ers and 67ers. There is kind of a sense of in engaging, in hearing what they have to say and sitting with them. Am I validating their indigeneity? Am I validating their narrative? I know that I personally, not connected to this specific conversation, but I once said something about Nakba, and I was referring specifically to 1948, and I said something Nakba because in my reference, and the person in front of me kind of jumped. So, okay, you're that far left. There shouldn't be a state of Israel in your mind. We all should be. And no, I believe in a democratic and Jewish state of Israel, connecting to what Professor Kuttner said before about I want everything. I'm not willing to give up on anything. It doesn't negate my recognition of Nakba. I don't see the two as mutually exclusive, even though I understand the ramifications of that. Having said that, I think that what I find on the Israeli side that is the closest to anti-normalization is two things: not wanting to provide acknowledgement and recognition and kind of understanding that that is what they're doing in that association. And second is by engaging, I think that the first thing that I said is not very prevalent in Israeli society. The second thing is because of the extremist governments that we have on both sides, I think that within Israeli society, the left has been very effectively demonized. And so if you're engaging with Palestinians, you're a leftist, but the word that they would use in Hebrew is smolan, and the way that they would spell it would mean small, which is to say degrading, derogatory, dismissive. And I think that, people don't want to be labeled that way. And that is kind of something that is preventing them from engaging. I will, however, say that we, specifically in the work that we do in our programming, what we always strive to do, and with 99% success, all of our programs have 50% Israeli Jews, 50% Palestinians, and within that, we try to break it to a fair representation of the entire political spectrum on the Jewish Israeli side, and on the Palestinian side, in recognition of the differences, having a third 48ers, a third East Jerusalemites, and a third West Bankers, so that we have a good representation on both societies of everyone, and try to have that diversity. So on the Palestinian, which is to say, on the Palestinian side in my interaction, I find that anti-normalization has really been weaponized, and not so much so on the Israeli side, at least from my experience. I just want to say, having said that I really connected to something that Professor Dajani said about it's not enough to have dialogue. We do have to make sure to level the playing field as far as education goes when we enter dialogue. And it's given me a lot of food for thought, because I never thought about it that way. I absolutely agree that dialogue within the realm of ignorance is just not sufficient, and we do need to provide that common, I was going to say common ground, and I take it back, not the common ground, but the education, the leveling of the playing field, of really understanding the background. I often notice that when both Palestinians and Israeli Jews speak to each other, they don't even recognize that they're speaking in national narratives, because they don't know, they don't have the background, they don't have the education, so they don't understand where they're using terminology that has been weaponized, where they're using national narratives as opposed to personal narratives, etc. I absolutely agree, and I think that it's given me a lot of food for thought on what kind of how it trickles down to our work.
Thank you so much. I don't know if Ran, you also want to?
I'll take a quick moment just to comment on the last thing that Hela said, that provoked me to add something. I thought I'll skip it all together, but we need to understand that dialogue for the sake of dialogue is something that, as a privileged Jew, I feel very much at home with. But it's something that, if you want to level the playing field, this is just not enough. So sometimes with Jews, with Israelis coming into a dialogue with the Palestinians, or among Jews and Arabs within Israel, that, we want to get together in order to meet, it's for the sake of process. Come on, spoken from a place of being really privileged and feeling that, that all you need is the encounter for the sake of encounter. And I think what we hear from Sulaiman, from Mohammad, and I think we hear again and again, that, you don't just level the playing field by just coming together and look at each other in the eye by just speaking to each other. There's something that more profound that needs to be changed, and we need to understand that there's the power imbalance that is so big here, and the occupation when you're talking about Palestinians, but it's about access to power when it's speaking about Arabs within Israel. So it's just not enough. And this is where I meet my lefty Jewish colleagues, friends, sometimes telling me, you know, you really challenge us over, we vote for merits and all of that, but you really challenge us because we never thought of going that far as to rock the boat with regard to some of the infrastructure and the presuppositions that we come into these conversations. So engaging, be aware of the differences of motivations.
Thank you. I want to ask Mohammad and Sulaiman if they also want to add something further to this part of the conversation.
Will I give my time to Sulaiman? Because I think it's only 2 minutes or things like that, so it's not. Let one speak. I will give my time to Sulaiman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So gracious.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mohammad. Now, look, things can look really complex with million details, and especially the challenges that exist in front of our work as a peace community that has also to evaluate itself and to check the values, the terms, the strategies we use, because some of the strategies, the frameworks that still in the place are created after Oslo. It was good for the time being. We are in 2022. I think there is a huge younger generation that maybe have their experience that also born even after Oslo joining. I believe some of the kids of Tech to Peace born after Oslo agreement, actually. So I would really argue us to think about this and the use of technology, the internet now, that maybe enable us, giving us opportunity here. In the end, I believe that in summary, we have really to struggle against this separation system by all means of nonviolence and the legitimate means that we're talking about here. At the same time, to create really I don't want to call it alternative anymore, the new reality we are seeking to create. And this is where I feel personally, and many of us maybe has been working a lot and our hearts there. And what some friends say, keep one leg in reality, one leg in the vision and the dream. And that's where we're moving. Yeah. And thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank all of you so much for participating in this webinar. Thank you for touching on so many points and providing really food for reflection, food for thought, as Hela was saying, and to show once again how this work needs to be stratified and touch not only on just one element. It's not just action, it's not just dialogue, it's really complex, as Ran was saying, reality is complex, and aim for that complexity and to respect that complexity. So thanks once again. I want to thank also everyone in the audience for staying with us. I also ask you, please, if you haven't already, sign up for our newsletter so you can keep in touch with our activities and be informed about upcoming webinars. And the recording of the webinar will be available on our channels on YouTube and Facebook. So yes, it can be visible also later. Thank you again. Have a good night.
Thank you.
And till soon. Bye.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And for all the great work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Really.